So, during my time as a surgeon, Solange was working as an emergency room nurse. She was always juggling her time between work and her travels. We found ourselves in all sorts of challenging situations across Africa, and we just rolled with the punches. We delivered babies, fixed broken bones, and even helped out the local dentist when necessary. This was my second mission with Doctors Without Borders, and her third. The first time was really hard on me, both physically and mentally. I ended up losing 20 pounds, which I really couldn't afford to lose. I was really down in the dumps, almost lost it completely with depression. When I finally made it back home, I was just waiting for the moment when I could fall into my husband's arms and have a good cry for about 10 minutes. After that, I pulled myself together and gave my 7-year-old son a big hug and kiss until he was like, "Okay, Mom, that's enough." But I noticed that my husband was acting a bit distant towards me in those first few days back. It seemed like he was holding on to some anger about me leaving in the first place. I remember we had some pretty heated arguments about it, him saying I should have let someone else deal with the saving. Hey, babe, you know you have folks back home who need you more. People are dying left and right here, but I could save lives right in our own neighborhood. And you can sleep in our own bed without stressing about getting attacked. It's not that risky, I'll be in a safe area and I can help way more people there than I could here. Want me to look up some stats for you? Sometimes I hated his job. He was a detail-oriented freelance writer who started from scratch but now writes for big newspapers and magazines, even winning awards. Yo, my buddy got famous on YouTube and now has like 2 million subscribers. He even did some stuff for CNN with funny videos. Our niece said he's an influencer now, but he didn't even know what that meant. He did some research and then made a video telling people to fact-check and think for themselves. It took him 5 months to come to terms with me leaving, and another 3 months before I actually left. He was acting all distant. I told him I'll be back soon, but his sad eyes stuck with me. Things will never be the same, I won't trust you to put our family first again. This is your final warning. If you abandon us again, don't bother coming back because we won't be here. His words really hurt as he took our crying baby from me and walked away without even looking back. I was sent to a rural African country that was pretty underdeveloped, especially outside of the cities. My operating room was just a tent that wasn't even properly set up. During the summer, strong winds would often mess up surgeries by covering everything in dust. It was a surprise every time the tent flaps flew open. Yo, we didn't let no infections get us down, but we still saved a bunch of lives. I even helped deliver 4 babies, one for this young mom who was barely a teenager. After she bounced back, she dipped out, leaving her baby behind with her rifle. People started talking about some vengeance force and angels scaring off the insurgents. After 3 months, I was feeling hella trapped and anxious. It was my first time rooming with Solange, so I asked her why she was so chill while I was freaking out. Let me tell you, girl, you need some good loving, like one of those wild nights that leave you gasping for air and pleasure. Maybe that's the kind of thing that could work for a single lady like yourself. Me? Oh, I'm married, she said with a smile, then pulled out her phone to show me pictures of her 2 little girls and her good-looking man, my husband, and kids. But you're hooking up with Jean-Luc, right? Just. Yep, and if he's busy, I'll share a bed with Eric, she replied. But look, no wedding rings allowed here. It's just symbolic, nobody's actually married in this place. And whatever goes down in this country, stays here. We'll go back to our partners and stay loyal. Whenever I leave, I always give my rings to my husband to hold on to until I come back. He puts them back on me as soon as I return, like a little ritual. We had a scare a few years ago when one of the doctors forgot her birth control and ended up getting pregnant. It caused some drama and she ended up divorcing her husband. The organization paid him off to keep quiet about it. Crazy stuff, right? Can't serve again, what about diseases? We're medical professionals, remember? We get tested every month and if something happens, we take care of it fast. Trust me, no one will know. I held on for 5 months, but losing a mother and child to an IED destroyed me. Despite my best efforts, they both died, leaving me heartbroken. I started drinking heavily and woke up next to a male nurse, Rodrigo, who made a move on me and I gave in. He stuck around until his rotation ended 4 days later. I knew my husband would sense something, but he was still mad about it. When I left, it took 4 months before we got intimate again. I gotta confess, a lot of times when my husband and I were getting close, I couldn't help but think about Rodrigo's stamina or Michelle's size. I tried to push those memories away, but sometimes I'd use a toy and end up calling out their names. A year later, things got back to normal, but then the organization asked me to fill in for 3 months as an emergency replacement. I never told my husband it was because of a mortar shell. We argued for 3 days until he just gave up and said, "Do whatever you want, but don't expect us to be here. When you come back, I'm gonna try to get custody of Tommy. No judge in their right mind would let him live with you." I was so surprised. It had only been 13 weeks. I tried to talk to him, but he barely said a word to me until I left. Surprisingly, he drove me to the airport. "I didn't do it for you, I did it for myself. Watching you walk away, knowing what you could lose, is something I need to see to get through the next few months. Things will be different when you come back. Take your time, whether it's a month, a year, or forever, it's all good." He just turned away without saying anything else. When he said those words, I knew he was serious. I knew that if I wanted to save my family, I had to act fast. I made up my mind to sort things out as soon as I got back and made my way to the ticket counter. Salange greeted me with a hug when I got to the location, and to be honest, it was even worse than the last place. "I'm glad you're here. Don't bother unpacking, get ready, we need you urgently," she said. There had been a mortar attack on a village 40 miles away, and I was shocked at how many people had managed to survive long enough to make it to the clinic. My team busted their asses for 11 hours straight with no breaks. About half of our patients survived, which was pretty good considering the situation. 5 didn't make it on my operating table. After the 4th one passed, I had to move on to the next patient while they cleared the body and got ready for the next one. One of the casualties was a 9-year-old girl. Her heart stopped as she cried out for her mother. I was completely numb emotionally. Salange took me to the communal shower and helped me clean up. Modesty went out the window in that setting. Time was running out, so we had to hustle. Men and women started showering together after a while, and even walking in on people being intimate in the shower didn't faze me anymore. I just moved to the other side and tried to ignore it. Later, Salange climbed into the bunk with me and held me while I cried myself to sleep. By the next week, I had adjusted. We talked about our past deployments and going back home. Salange seemed happy when she talked about reuniting with her partner and almost not joining this mission. He's getting impatient, and I don't blame him. He let me go on 3. "Hey, I've been on so many tours and I think this one is the last straw for me. How's your husband dealing with it? I remember he was not happy last time. He's saying he's going to divorce you and fight for custody using my service against me. I hope I can fix things when I get home, but it took him a long time to forgive me last time. Don't stress too much, babe. He's probably just worried about your safety and might be keeping a close eye on you for a while. But he'll forgive you eventually, just don't push your luck with the organization. Appreciate what you've done, but at some point, you gotta put yourself first. I hope you're right. I'll do my best to fix things when I get back, and I'm not signing up for another tour. It's time for someone else to step up and save the world." Then I asked, "So who's keeping you warm in bed these days?" She giggled like a schoolgirl and said, "Gerard. He's from Ayers and pretty skilled as a doctor, among other things. Are you getting involved?" "Nah, it's just for a few weeks. I can handle it." As I sat on the plane, I planned out my strategy. There's no way I could totally go back to my old life, so I had to make sure Brian knew for sure that I was done with all that drama and ready to be a loyal wife. Salange told me to win him back through our son, then she laughed. Turns out, it was way harder than I thought. When I got home, he was gone. My mom was looking after our kid and told me he took off for 10 days, saying it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. In a way, it was a good thing because it gave me a chance to focus on my son. Once I could win him back, everything else would fall into place. Things were going according to plan to get my family back together, but then I discovered that Brian was at the corporate offices talking to the head shrink. "Thanks for your interest in our charity, Mr. Oliver. We'll take all the publicity we can get since our work is super important in providing necessary services where they are needed most. It's a shame we've lost some team members over the years, which makes it tough to recruit new volunteers. But yeah, it's a cause worth fighting for. Your organization's struggles are downplayed, but the stakes are high. I bet you make sure to check if volunteers are mentally ready before they join, right? It's a great cause, but it can really mess with your head. Some volunteers end up having breakdowns or PTSD. We provide full support for as long as they need it. You seem to really care about your team's mental health. Do a lot of volunteers do multiple tours? Some do, but we only let them do 4 tours max and usually advise against it. 2 tours is more common, considering all the stress they face. How do they handle it while on duty? They lean on each other for support, which helps them get through it. So, I was looking into the morale and fears that come with high divorce rates among volunteers who have done multiple tours. What do you think about this issue? The doctor took a moment to think and said that some volunteers really struggle with the challenges and try to find comfort wherever they can, even if it ends up hurting them in the long run. We work to help repair relationships that have been affected by their service, but sometimes failed marriages and broken relationships are seen as necessary sacrifices. How do you explain this to the spouses who are left behind, not knowing what the future holds? I'm starting to worry about where this interview is going with stories like these. So, this stuff could totally mess up the organization's rep, why I know. My research shows you like to sweep these problems under the rug and not let the public know. I found out about at least 3 times where loads of cash were shelled out to keep things hush-hush. Do the donors even know their money is going towards this shady stuff? The doc got up and was like, I think we are done here, Mr. Oliver. You better think long and hard about what you're gonna write. You could destroy careers with these accusations. The guy just smirked, giving the doc the creeps. That's when I found out. During my background checks, I prioritize my independence and don't cave to pressure. Just a heads up, look into Dr. Hope Oliver. I think she has a history with your organization. The guy walked towards the door and left, closing it behind him. The doctor sighed heavily, feeling like there was a personal grudge in the guy's actions. Being independent meant he might be hard to sway. He told his assistant to gather info on Dr. Hope Oliver, knowing things could get out of hand quickly. Then he made a call. The boss called me from the charity and it was Dr. Oliver, a big shot. He said they need me at headquarters ASAP for something super important. But I can't just drop everything right now. My husband is out of town for work, I'm looking after our kid solo, and I'm back to my hospital job with surgeries stacked up. And just so you know, I'm not going back to working full-time. It was great while it lasted, but my priorities have shifted. Family comes first now. My husband wasn't backing me up at work. Your husband is the reason we are calling. He stopped by yesterday and said some troubling things that could ruin our reputation. We are trying to handle the situation, so it's in your best interest to come see us. I felt a chill go down my spine. Brian won't stop once he hears something. Doctors and nurses love to gossip, and if news of my overseas work leaks, it could be bad for a lot of people. After hanging up, I called Salange right away. I told everyone about how I had praised Brian's journalism skills and how we even watched him on CNN in France before we left. Oh God, this could be a total disaster. My husband would never forgive me easily. You need to reach out to your husband, beg him, promise anything to stop him. Think about the others, most of us are married. This could blow up and spread across 3 continents. I tried calling Brian multiple times but it all went to voicemail. He didn't respond to emails or texts. I was freaking out. I had to rearrange my schedule and made up a family emergency, which it was to me. Got on a flight to New York and landed at their main office by 9 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Parkins, who was supposed to evaluate me before I could get started, met me at the reception and took me straight to his office. After some small talk, he got right to the point. Your husband seems to have some anger problems, Doc. I need to ask you some hard-hitting questions. I promise that anything we talk about here will be kept confidential. It's important that you're honest if any of us are going to deal with this situation. Are you ready? I nodded, mentally preparing myself for what was about to come. Did you hook up with any co-workers while you were on the job? If so, who were you careful around? Did you keep things low-key and not talk about work outside of work? I mentioned my 2 main squeezes and 2 others from a casual thing. Dr. Parkins didn't show any emotion, which made me wonder what he was thinking. Thanks for being honest. To be real, this kind of stuff happens a lot, similar to what goes on in the healthcare industry. Apart from these crazy situations, I've helped a lot of people dealing with stuff. Okay, so here's the deal: listen to your gut feeling 95% of the time, keep things hush-hush, and confessing usually doesn't lead to good outcomes. I had a chat with your hubby and I'm pretty sure he's onto your little flings while you were away. He's pissed off, and angry people don't usually think straight. In the past, we've been able to handle situations like this, but this time it's different. We can try to put pressure on the situation, but it's not looking good. He's got total control over his own platform, so he can say whatever he damn well pleases. There's not much we can do about it, and that could really mess things up. How many wives are gonna stick by him once this all comes out? We need their support. If you can get your husband to listen to you, now's the time to speak up. My answer didn't make him happy, sir. I have no clue where my husband is or what he's up to right now. He's not talking to me at all. Who knows what he'll do next? The next day, we found out it was all over the news in New York. Newspapers everywhere covered the story of 48 spouses who banded together to sue the charity. They claimed it wrecked their marriages and relationships over the last 6 years. They were after millions in compensation. The lawsuit was filed in courts all over the world: France, England, Italy, Algeria, the US, and Canada. The charity was shocked and furious, refusing to work with them. They tried to talk it out, but the spouses dropped a bombshell: they had recordings of every meeting and phone call since they started looking into things. They had the charity cornered. Protected by state laws and more, even if he didn't use them in court, he could on his own platform. Recent veteran spouses were demanding answers from their partners, many of whom didn't believe what they heard. Less reputable newspapers jumped on the scandal, stirring up closeness and controversy. There seemed to be no shortage of material. Social media dubbed us doctors without morals, and the mainstream media adopted it as the official narrative. Brian was portrayed as the whistleblower, directly implicating me in the media. I was getting interview requests from outlets all over the world, but I turned them all down. I thought about speaking out as a way to get through to Brian, but I never got the chance. When he finally came back home, he ignored me and spent most of his time with our son. When I asked him how to reach him in emergencies, he gave me a disposable phone with his number on it. He warned me that if I ever called for anything other than our son, he'd get rid of it. That was the first time he came to pick up Tommy. I was waiting for him on the steps of my mom's house, and I was like, "Brian, we need to have a chat. I need to explain things and make you understand that what happened overseas has nothing to do with us. It didn't impact our lives and it didn't mean anything." When I got back home, he just stared at me for a moment and then asked, "Did you ever stop to think about how your actions would affect our marriage while you were off having a good time over there? Would you forgive me if I had multiple affairs while you were away and then tried to brush it off by saying they meant nothing because you weren't here? It's not the same old excuse. This chat is done, bring Tommy out so I can drop something off. It makes me feel awful." After that, he stopped talking to me. If I tried to talk to him, he would just stare until our son came out. Tommy was now living with his dad all the time. The courts decided he should stay there since it was familiar and comfortable for him. The judge also let him live in our house until everything was sorted out because he was the main caregiver. I rented a small apartment near the hospital. It was just a simple place, very different from the house. With the big yard we bought 5 years ago, Brian didn't have to work as hard as me, so he became a part-time stay-at-home dad. He worked during Tommy's naps and later when he was in school. He redesigned the backyard, adding a fence, sandbox, swing set, and a big above-ground pool where they spent many summer hours. I think I only used it twice in 5 years. One day, I came home to find 3 girls playing in our pool. I was really mad, but Brian just grinned at me. He said, "I still have to work, you know. I could probably work at night." Sure, you looked after him, but do you really want to deal with a 6-year-old's demands after a long day? That's why I think Kimberly is a better choice as a babysitter. I've hired her because she's highly qualified, unlike the other 2 who are just friends. As part of the agreement, she can use the pool a couple of days a week and bring 2 friends with her, but no more and definitely no boys. Tommy really likes her and she's great with him, which means I can focus on work. She doesn't use the pool while she's on the job, unless it's with Tommy because she's also teaching him how to swim. His swimming skills aren't that impressive. I got what he was saying, but it still bugged me. You cool with working with girls right in front of you? What are you reading? My office is on the other side of the house. I might see a bit if I stand up at my desk and look out the window, otherwise I come out here like now to tell them it's getting late and they should go home. Tommy woke up from his nap and ran into my arms, then he dragged me over to meet the girls so I could meet Miss Kimmy. As I chatted with them, I was chilling out and then Kim said she's gonna start nursing school in the fall, so we connected on that. I hooked her up with a volunteer gig at the hospital and gave her some guidance, even wrote her a killer recommendation letter for college. Kim was killing it in her 2nd year, then her little sister Lexi took over and Tommy was all about her, almost as much as Kim. I had a feeling they were holding it down while I was gone. The charity wanted to settle the lawsuit with a non-disclosure agreement. They filled me in on the negotiations. Brian's laughing didn't go down well with their lawyers. Everyone else has agreed, so why can't you just let it go? One of the lawyers asked. I have moved on, Brian replied, but I haven't forgiven her or your organization. I know how hard you worked to recruit her, promising how good it would look on her resume and maybe lead to consulting gigs later. I'm still looking into it, trying to figure out how you handle things in other cases. Sometimes the victims were paid off with money or other things. I ain't interested in doing business with you guys. I don't need the money and I'm busy working on my 2nd piece about your organization. I've got my own deadline, so just leave me be. As they were about to leave, the youngest lawyer, a woman who graduated from law school 3 years ago, asked him a question. She said, shouldn't you be making your wife's life hell instead? I mean, she cheated on you, right? He smiled at her, which threw her off. Then he showed her a picture of his son and said, this is my boy. He's the reason I haven't gone off on my wife completely yet. Without him, I would have unleashed my full anger on her as soon as she got back from her last trip. Maybe my anger is misplaced, but your organization must have known what was going on over the years. You even have protocols for dealing with a spouse's anger. You calculated the impact on your organization and made a decision. So, apparently, they thought it was okay to cause some collateral damage until I showed up. I must be their worst nightmare. I have my own money, so they can't scare me with losing my job. I make enough cash, so they can't ruin me financially. And I have enough anger to brush off any sneaky threats. They can go now. She looked as white as a ghost as she walked away. The guy's intense rage was enough to make her uneasy. I wasn't shocked when I got served with divorce papers. Every legal move I made just led to dead ends. I made sure to pay a visit. I was going to his place so much that he had to get a restraining order against me. If I got within 100 feet of him or his crib, I could get busted. My bosses weren't feeling the drama my personal life was causing, even though there was no proof of me messing up at work. The boss called me in and said, I'm speaking on behalf of the board. Your personal drama is getting out of hand. We think highly of you as a skilled surgeon, but this is just a friendly request to see if you can chill things out with your man. Please, Sarah, I promise to do my best. Even though I couldn't talk to him face to face, he told me I could shoot him an email if needed. That night, I spent 5 hours writing an email and after sending it, I was hoping for a reply before hitting the hay. The next morning, I winced at his response. He pretty much said he doesn't give a damn about my job or the hospital unless it has something to do with our kid. He also mentioned that if I catch him lying, I should call him out on it and he'll take it back. Apparently, a few people from my hospital have been doing some shady stuff for the organization. I might have to look into that. He suggested I warn them, but that didn't really help. I showed the email to someone. Admin dude was like, shit, Sarah, this is bad. I gotta talk to those people and give them a heads up. It might get awkward cause you're tight with them. We can't let patient care slide, so finish up today and take a week off to fix this mess. Good luck, Sarah. Basically, fix your shit or start job hunting. My boss interviewed some folks and I got some interesting calls from 3 techs, 2 nurses and a doctor. So basically, 2 people hooked up while on a mission, even though they were already in relationships. They brought that drama back home with them, and now 6 people are in a sticky situation. Should they come clean now and hope for forgiveness, or keep their mouths shut and pretend nothing happened? Personally, I hope they all kept quiet, because if one person spilled the beans, it could start a whole mess. I only found out about this later because I was too busy with my own stuff. I had my lawyer reach out to Brian's lawyer to set up a divorce if they agreed. I had to come to terms with the fact that my marriage was completely screwed up, especially when only one of us was putting in any effort. I was shocked when they finally agreed to meet just 3 days before our scheduled meeting. Brian dropped a brutal essay calling out doctors for thinking they are all high and mighty with their God complex. He did his homework, consulting experts and backing up his points with solid research. A well-respected psychologist even mentioned that this complex is common in pretty much all successful people, to some degree, no matter what they do. But it's especially bad in the field of medicine. So Brian was talking about how serious and important our work is, and how feeling like we deserve special treatment can affect how we behave. It got me thinking really hard about myself. I saw a lot of my own behavior reflected in the essay. Was I really that arrogant? Did I think my job made me above the rules? Did I try to justify my actions by keeping my work and personal life separate? The answer to all of these questions was yes. I was annoyed during those missions, but I could have chosen not to get close to anyone or just stayed home instead. I convinced myself that hooking up with other people was just a way to distress and wouldn't mess up my marriage. I thought I deserved a little fun to keep myself sane, and I figured what happened outside of my house wouldn't really matter. But after thinking about it, I realized I missed the thrill of being with new partners and might have cheated again if the opportunity arose, and I felt confident I wouldn't get caught. It was a wake-up call for me. The meeting with my spouse went better than I thought it would. There were a few small issues to work out, but we handled them quickly. Brian would have primary custody of our son, which was... we've already sorted out the arrangement, but I made sure I have generous visitation rights. Our incomes were pretty much on par, so we decided that neither of us would have to pay alimony. Instead of child support, I agreed to chip in for a college fund for our son. I think the agreement was fair overall. Brian wanted to keep the house, so instead of selling him my share, I just transferred ownership to him. I suggested that he put the money he would have paid me into our son's college fund. He was grateful for that gesture. Looking at Brian, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. We were actually good partners, despite our arguments. We always managed to work things out. Our relationship was all good until I started going on those missions. I had a therapist, believe it or not, who was trying to help me not mess up future relationships. They made me see that I needed to focus on myself instead of just being part of a couple. Brian wasn't perfect, he could be cold and moody, especially when he was mad about something. But he tried to keep it together. He was all for my career before I went on my first mission, but things changed after that. When I got back, he acted like he didn't care anymore. If I had a conflict in my schedule, he didn't even bother to ask. That's when he realized our relationship was falling apart, and he started looking out for himself. After all the legal stuff was sorted out and the lawyers were gone, we finally sat down in the conference room and had a heart-to-heart chat. It hit me that it had been ages since we really talked like that. This is gonna be the last time I say sorry to you, Brian. Looking back, I wish I never got involved in this mess. On that plane, I was totally selfish and thought only about myself. Now I see that I was making choices without thinking about you and our son. It's sad that any decision I make from now on will be without either of you. But hey, at least we still have our son to keep us tied together for the next 15 years or so, until he's done with college and all that. Then we'll have to deal with planning weddings and arguing about grandkids, so we'll always be in each other's lives. His words brought a smile to my face, even though I was crying. It was just too much, so I gave in to Brian. So, I think that last kiss was probably the end for us. Not sure if it was the divorce or our talk that made him feel better, but he started backing off from the organization. They ended up settling that lawsuit for a lot of money, which really helped Tommy's college fund. The stress got to be too much, so I switched hospitals and moved to the other side of town to work for our biggest competitor. Management said all the right things, but I could tell they were actually relieved I was leaving. Some of the folks who had been on missions before were having marriage problems. Luckily, only one of my relationships ended in divorce, even though a few others are on the rocks. I took a break from dating for almost a year. When I did start dating again, I was cautious and didn't jump into anything serious for another year. That relationship ended when I found out he didn't want kids and couldn't stand being around them. It took another year and a half before I found love. He was a doctor, a pediatrician, and he absolutely loved kids. We took things slow since both of us had recently been divorced, so we didn't want to rush into anything. Why I know, it actually worked out pretty well, cause we really got to know each other before things got serious. Brian stayed single too, even though he was seeing this producer from CNN and it was getting pretty serious. Tommy really liked her, and her two little girls were really sweet and loved him whenever they hung out. The network was pushing Brian to commit to them exclusively, but he wasn't too thrilled about it. I knew if they didn't back off, he'd bail when his contract ended in 4 months. MSNBC and Fox were both trying to snag him. I wanted to get him on board so he wouldn't be MIA for too long. One day, I was in the area and thought I'd hit up Tommy to see if he wanted to grab some ice cream at the local spot. It was a cute little shop that made their own ice cream, with about 12 flavors that switched up depending on the time of year. They used local fruit whenever they could, and it just so happened to be peach season, my absolute fave. I used to bring a cooler and load up on quarts of peach ice cream every time I swung by. I almost skipped it this time, but glad I didn't. I was pulling into the driveway when I spotted Brian's car, but I was already signaling to turn in. Tommy saw me and quickly ran off the front porch with a big smile on his face, followed by his two little buddies. Brian and Alicia were chilling on the swing, and they waved at me as I got closer. I crouched down to give Tommy a hug, and then the adorable 4-year-old girl reached out her arms for a hug too. I could have backed away, but instead I grinned and picked her and her 6-year-old sister up for a big hug. After I was done, the little one didn't want to let go, so I ended up carrying her with me. Brian was smirking a little, while Alicia looked a bit lost for words. "Hey there, I'm Sarah. How about we make a deal? I'll swap you a 10-year-old boy, slightly used, for these adorable kids. Maybe I'll even throw in a pony," I said with a grin. Alicia smirked back, "A pony, huh? Let me think about that. I'm Martha, but everyone calls me Marty." "Sarah it is then." I turned and hugged Tommy again. "I have to run, honey. I was just passing by and thought about. Hey, I was gonna grab some ice cream, but I see you're tied up. We can do it another time." Totally forgot I was still holding the 4-year-old and she's pulling my hair, asking for ice cream. "You'll have to ask Mom about that, kiddo." I tried to put her down but she wouldn't budge, still wanting that ice cream. "Looks like I'm stuck. How about we go get some ice cream, Marty? There's a dope spot just down the street with the best homemade flavors. It's peach season right now, which happens to be my fave. My treat." Marty smiled and got up, giving Brian a nod. "Just give me a peck on the cheek, I'll be back in like 45 minutes. Why don't you prep everything for the grill?" We decided to walk, and seeing Brian's jaw drop made me grin as we went to the store. Taylor was holding on to me like her life depended on it, making me realize how much energy it takes to carry a little one around. We told them to behave or they wouldn't get any ice cream, and they straightened up. Taylor couldn't make up her mind and kept changing her order before finally settling on blueberry. Tanya took her time thinking about all the flavors. Before I decided on a banana, I tried a peach first. Then the server let Marty taste the peach and she liked it, so she chose peach too. Tommy knew all the flavors and went with vanilla. The girls tried everyone else's choices and agreed that peach was the best. They said they would get it next time. Surprisingly, they managed to stay clean and tidy despite the messy situation. The kids were happy as they walked back. Marty ended up carrying Taylor even though she didn't want to. Tanya held my hand tightly. When we got back, I told them I had to leave. Got some sweet kisses and a tight hug from my son before I left, all smiles. Marty seemed like a good fit for Brian and is always wanted more kids. It looked like he was making moves up in the world. Marty called me out of the blue, asking to grab lunch. I had to think about it for a sec, knowing she wanted to talk about Brian. Eventually, I decided. Can you swing by the hospital around noon? We'll have to eat in the cafeteria, but the food there is surprisingly good. Sounds good to me, noon it is. I'll see you then. So, Marty was way smaller than me, but she had this confident vibe of someone who's killing it in her field. We picked out our food, sat down, and chatted while eating. Then, she pushed her tray away and grinned. Brian and I are tying the knot. I wanted to tell you myself, not to throw it in your face or anything. Your past is your business, but you're still linked to him through Tommy. I figured it'd be better to talk in person. If you're cool with it, can you fill me in on what went wrong in your marriage? I know Brian can get really into his stuff. He works sometimes, but he's the nicest guy I've ever met. Thanks to all the therapy I've had, I can finally be real. Long story short, I started to think I was more important than Brian. I admired his intelligence and hard work, but as a doctor, I felt like my role was vital. I got a bit cocky. Brian liked being at home, but I preferred going out and getting attention for my looks and talents. I started making decisions on my own, thinking I knew best for our family. It stopped being about family decisions and turned into what does Sarah want? I screwed up big time, but going to see that doctor from overseas was the last straw. Even when Brian threatened to leave if I went back, I thought I could convince him to stay. Well, we all know how that went. If I could turn back time, would I do things differently? Yeah, probably. But let's be real, it wouldn't have worked out anyway. I left, knowing there would be consequences. I cheated while I was away, thinking everything would be fine when I got back. It was a rude awakening when it wasn't. It shattered my self-image as someone who doesn't play by society's rules. In the end, I realized I was wrong. I switched jobs, lost my son and husband, and what I got in return wasn't worth what I lost. She just sat there quietly for a minute, taking in what I had told her, then let out a sigh. I've dealt with similar situations before, although not personally. I've worked with a lot of high-profile people and seen their arrogance up close. One of them even asked for favors right before going on air. We were in his office and he just dropped his pants, saying nothing relaxes me on screen like a good BJ. I couldn't help but chuckle at the ridiculousness of it all. I grabbed his junk and gave it a good yank. He was screaming like a little kid, so I brought him down to the ground and got up close to him. I whispered in his ear that if he ever tried pulling that crap again with me or any other woman, I would finish what I started. He weakly nodded his head, thinking I was going to let him go. But then I yanked him down harder and gave him a good slap across the face. The red mark stayed for hours and they had to find someone else to host the show. Management threatened me, but I had recorded the whole thing. I told them that if it messed with my career, I would sell the story to their biggest competitor. 6 months later, they didn't mess with me. Renew his contract, she just looked at her nails and then grinned at me. So, you see, I know what a god complex is all about. But more importantly, I know how to deal with people like that and handle the ones I can't avoid. I'm happy you've learned from your mistakes and I'm sorry it ended in divorce for you. But I'm also happy it brought me the man of my dreams. Does that make sense to you? It did for me. I talked about it with my new partner that evening while we cooked dinner. It had become our thing to cook together when one of us got home early. We could cook alone, but we liked doing it together to relax, talk about our days, and distress from work. This gave us time for the good stuff like cuddling while watching movies or listening to music. But then things went south with the pediatric Ian after I found some messed up stuff on his laptop. Mine was broken, so I used his to send something. Yo, I got this crazy email about some surgery, right? So, I was snooping around and came across this folder with my name on it, thinking it was gonna be personal pics or something. But nah, it was full of pics of me, mostly half-naked or asleep, and some way too intimate moments. Dude had been using different cameras to capture all this for his own sick collection. There were even pics of me in the shower and on the toilet, like WTF. I was so grossed out, I kept digging and found another folder called Candyland with even more messed up and explicit stuff. I almost puked, man. Before I puked, I rinsed my mouth and brushed my teeth. Then I grabbed my laptop and hightailed it to the nearest police station. 2 detectives, 1 dude and 1 chick, glanced at the files for like 30 seconds before getting serious and crashing the district attorney's dinner. After I spilled the beans, he told me to bring the laptop back to the pediatrician's crib while they got a search warrant. I called to spill the tea on what I found on my way back. When I got to his place, he was freaking out and pacing around like a maniac. Yo, so I was just chilling with my laptop and then this dude flips out and straight up punches me in the face so hard my nose breaks and I pass out. Then, right when someone rings the doorbell, he bolts out the back door with his laptop, but runs smack into 2 big cops. They thought he was trying to resist arrest, so they roughed him up real bad, leaving him with bruises and taser burns. Dude ended up getting a 15-year sentence after the trial, and turns out he was grooming one of his victims. Crazy, right? His patients sued him, his parents took all his money, and now he's broke in jail where he's getting messed with by other inmates. He's not doing well at all, got hurt real bad in his first year, now he's blind in one eye and walks with a limp. When I went back to my therapist, I struggled with the fact that I had no idea he was capable of such awful things. He never showed any signs of being a creep with kids, except for mentioning he wanted to have his own someday. His words used to give me hope, but now, I freaked out when I remembered how well he fooled everyone, including Sarah, 4 years. My therapist comforted me, but everyone was shocked when the truth finally came out. Maybe it was fate or divine intervention that led you to find that computer. Just remember, there are plenty of good guys out there. One of them will find you someday, I'm sure of it. I used to have a good guy, but I messed it up. Maybe being single now is my punishment for my mistakes. 9 months later, I met Jeremiah. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a killer smile and the sweetest eyes. I met this dude at a convention my hospital sent me to for networking and recruitment. He had some gray hair but was still strong as hell. My shady past was behind me and I was making a name for myself at work. Even though job applications usually have strict rules, we were open to new talent. I was 35 at the time. Yo, did you hear about the youngest surgeon in the hospital? They were all about getting some fresh perspectives at the symposium. It covered a bunch of medical stuff, so I decided to check out Jeremiah. Turns out, he owns an insurance company that's all about healthcare, he's a certified public accountant and a registered nurse practitioner. Dude's got like 5 degrees in different fields and a super high IQ. His talk on malpractice had us all shook until he showed us how to avoid getting sued. Plus, he was funny, clear, and quick with it. Alright, so he starts off with a joke to break the tension, but then he really got everyone's attention with his final remarks. He basically said that it's okay to make mistakes, but you gotta own up to them. Trying to cover up your screw-ups just makes things worse. If the truth comes out later, it ruins your reputation and makes people think doctors are only in it for the money and don't know what they are doing. There's a push to limit malpractice payouts, and I've been working on this fancy algorithm that some states are thinking about using. But until then, just remember, the shittier you act, the more money, the more I'll be available to answer questions for the rest of the conference. Thank you. His presentation got a lot of good feedback and doctors were swarming around him. I couldn't get a word in, so I quickly moved on to my next seminar. I didn't see him again until later that night when I snuck into a conference room I thought was empty to avoid another doctor who was drunk and acting like he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I had to hide or else I might have slapped him, which wouldn't have been pretty. Things have been going well for business. I was shocked when I heard Jeremiah's voice out of nowhere. It's always nice to see a familiar face. I smiled, relieved to see him. I needed a break from dealing with difficult people. It's funny how some doctors, despite all their education, don't know much about the real world. Trust me, I've made my fair share of stupid mistakes as a doctor, but at least none of them harmed a patient. Looks like you're doing better than most then. We had a nice chat for the next 15 minutes before suddenly the door swung open and boom, Dr. Dick appeared. There you are. What are you up to? Just. Well, I was just about to have some fun with this guy, I joked. But you've crashed the party, go away. We were getting to the good part. He swayed a bit, trying to process what I said through his drunken haze. He was about to respond when Jeremiah stood up, towering over him. Leave now unless you want to stick around and watch. Maybe you can enjoy yourself while I take care of business with this babe." Dr. Dick opened and closed his mouth a few times. He said something quietly and then stumbled out. Jeremiah and I gave each other a look and started cracking up. Once we calmed down, we continued our chat, sticking to safe topics. When we said goodbye, I pecked him on the cheek and he gave me a warm hug. The next morning, we ran into each other at breakfast and he motioned for me to sit with him. We decided to grab lunch together after our seminars and workshops. Dinner was great. He took me to a peaceful restaurant away from the chaos of the conference. Later, we hit up a cozy club. We went to this place with not too loud music and danced to some slow songs. Even though I'm tall, I felt small and cozy in his arms. Later at the hotel, he walked me to my room and gave me a sweet kiss. It wasn't too intense, but it had me wanting more. As we got closer, we found out we were both from the same city. He had been married before, but his wife tragically passed away during childbirth because of some unknown condition. Thankfully, they were able to save the baby, who had to spend almost 2 months in the hospital and was now 7 years old, about 3 months into our relationship. After we got physical, I opened up to him about my past. He listened quietly, holding me while I cried, scared that he might want to break things off. But his response melted my heart. He said, "You can't change what happened before. It seems like you've made a lot of mistakes, but at least you've learned from them. If I didn't trust you, we wouldn't be where we are now." I tried to shower him with love, but thankfully it didn't turn out that way. By the end of the weekend, he was pretty tired. But we kept going. Things were moving slow at first, but I ended up spending more and more time at his place. I was super nervous when I introduced him to my son, but they hit it off right away. Jerry was really good at archery and he got Tommy into it. After talking to my ex, he didn't say much about their meeting, just that he seemed like a good guy. Then one day, I came home to find the house full of kids, Tommy and his 2 little sisters, along with Brian and Marty's child, an exceptionally bright little girl. She seemed really smart for her age. I raised an eyebrow and Jerry blushed a little before smiling. We are looking after this group for a few days while Marty goes to New York to get an award. Her career is really taking off now that she's the top producer of Brian's new show. CNN got Brian to host a 1-hour show 3 days a week, switching off with another show. The ratings were good and getting better. The only thing he asked for in negotiations was for his wife to run the show, and the network agreed right away. Marty totally killed it and the show won an Emmy. Brian was beaming with pride for his wife. He even gushed about how much he adores her on his show, making her blush. I couldn't help but tune in and feel a twinge of regret, realizing that if I had been loyal and not let my ego get in the way, he could have been praising me on air. Then I glanced over at Jerry and wondered if he was the one I was meant to be with all along. What was supposed to be? Jerry was stoked when the older girls wanted to try out Terry's bow, but it was too big for them. So, he took them to Academy to buy smaller bows and gear. Taylor picked it up quickly, and Tanya showed some potential. Lucy, Jerry's daughter, was a big help. Tina wanted a bow too, so I stepped in and got her a toy bow with suction cups instead of arrows. Surprisingly, she did pretty well for a 3-year-old. So, what was supposed to be a 2-day thing turned into 3. I kept kicking myself every time I had to peel an arrow off the TV screen, the patio door, or a car window. Jeremiah and the kids thought it was funny. I was so tired, but also happy. At first, Lucy wasn't too sure about me not wanting to share her dad with anyone else. But over time, she started to like me and we got really close. I showered her with all the love I couldn't give to my son, and she really blossomed. Having girls her age around for days cheered her up, and there were lots of hugs and kisses when they left. We were just chilling on the couch when Lucy climbed on top of us. After getting settled, she dropped a bombshell on me, saying, "Mom, can I have a little sister?" It was the first time she called me Mom, and I couldn't help but cry tears of joy as I hugged her. When I finally found my voice, I gave her a kiss on the head and said, "Well, that depends, sweetheart. What does Daddy think?" Daddy was grinning from ear to ear, holding up a small box. He said it was the best idea he's heard in a long time. I cried for a good 30 minutes, hugging and kissing them both. It was such a special moment. I was getting up there in age to have a baby, but my determination paid off and I gave birth to a healthy baby boy 2 weeks before my 38th birthday. The waiting room was crowded since I was a popular doctor and the nurses all adored me. Seeing Brian, Marty, and their kids there wasn't a surprise. But I was shocked when I was taken to see Brian's mother. She had moved away for a while and I didn't know she was back. Tears filled my eyes as she asked to hold her newest granddaughter. Soon, Jeremiah's mom and her were deep in conversation, planning out the futures of. Lucy was the first one to hold her baby brother after her parents. At first, she was a little bummed he was a boy, but that changed as soon as she saw his face. When he was 5 and she was 13, she'd pick him up and shower him with kisses whenever he got fussy. He'd laugh and try to wipe them off as fast as she planted them. One of the biggest pictures on her nightstand is the one of her holding her brother for the first time. Now, at 53 years old, I'm the respected elder of the surgical unit, not knowing my hands would soon no longer be able to do surgery. Hey, so I've been thinking about retiring early and the younger doctors and nurses at work see me as a motherly figure. One of the nurses, who's considered one of the prettier ones, asked for my advice. I heard you've worked with doctors internationally, and I've been offered a chance to join them. Do you have any advice for me? I didn't hold back in sharing my own experiences and the sacrifices it involved. The nurse is newly married, so I asked if her husband was on board with the idea. She said he doesn't know yet. In that case, you should talk it over with him. Are you ready for this? Being away from him for so long, will he wait for you to come back? The organization does good work, but there are always downsides and sacrifices. Think carefully before you make a decision. In the end, she chose not to go and someone else took her spot. She broke up with her boyfriend before leaving, but he was already engaged by the time she returned, crushing any hope of getting back together. We thought she might have ended things before leaving, maybe expecting to have a fling while away, but we never saw it coming. He bounced back pretty fast after their breakup. She was kinda down for like 4 months. When they asked her to take on a new project, she said no. Tommy got his master's in journalism and got a job as an assistant producer at Fox. Lucy was a junior in a pre-med program and Tanya, her roommate, was in the same program. Taylor, a senior, got a full scholarship for volleyball. Tina, a freshman in high school, seems to be all about boys at 14. She looks older than she is and guys can't help but act silly around her. But she's got a good head on her shoulders. She's got a lot on her plate, but when people doubt her, she just whips out photos of her and her fam slaying in archery and karate. Tommy was almost in the Olympics. JJ is a badass black belt at 15, and Lucy was a state champ in archery, narrowly beating her cousin Taylor. Tommy even has a master's in journalism and works at Fox, while Lucy is studying pre-med as a junior. So, my roommate Tanya was in the same program as Taylor, who was a senior on a full ride for volleyball. Then there's Tina, a freshman in high school who's more into boys than anything else. She's grounded, though, and if anyone tries to get too close, she'll show them pics of her kicking butt in archery and karate with her siblings and cousins Lucy and JJ. Tommy almost made it onto the Olympic team last year, while JJ, who's just 15, already has a second-degree black belt. And Lucy? Well, she won the state archery championship. So, like, a couple years back, she was in the same age group as her cousin Taylor and she barely beat her. Then one day, I ran into Brian at a coffee shop and we sat down together. I said sorry again for my behavior, but he was like, nah, it's all good, let's just forget about it. So we started joking around about our annoying kids and spouses for like 30 minutes, then we shared a quick kiss and went our separate ways. As I watched him walk away, I couldn't help but think about that saying cheaters never prosper. But in my case, I knew that wasn't true, cause I had definitely done something shady. Man, I was a real jerk back in the day, thinking I was better than everyone else. I paid for it big time, but I think all that suffering actually helped me grow as a person. I tried to show that growth in my marriage and relationships with the people I care about. When I mentored younger folks at work, I shared my story in hopes of making a positive impact. As I reached into my pocket and felt the envelope, I couldn't help but smile. It was my gift to my husband for our upcoming anniversary, a 2-week stay at a super fancy resort in Thailand. I just wanted to have a good time at the beach, maybe even go nude if I felt like it. Even though I didn't have the same killer body I had in my 30s, I still made an effort to stay in shape and was known as one of the hottest moms at my hospital. Jeremiah still thought I was a sexy young thing, and I hoped he'd always see me that way. So I just dealt with the struggles and tried not to dwell on how time and nature were changing me, especially when some of that aging was because of him.